Hey, hey, hey. All right, this recording is designed for the second part of the nervous system, so let's go ahead and jump all in. We know that the nervous system is made up of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, right? And so I think you already know this. The central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord, right? So the middle. So the brain and spinal cord. Now there are nerves that come out of the brain. Those are called cranial nerves, and they're peripheral. The nerves that come out of the spinal cord are called spinal nerves, and they're peripheral. So the nerves that come out of the brain and spinal cord, they're the peripheral nervous system. And that's what this PowerPoint is about. The central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. But we know the brain is big and it's complex and it controls lots, right? Sensations, perceptions, movement, thinking. So, feeling and sensing. But the brain consists of, and you know this because you've already studied for a lab, two cerebral hemispheres, a right and a left. The diencephalon, that's the thalamus and hypothalamus. We're going to get into that in the PowerPoint. The brainstem and the cerebellum. So that's what the brain consists of, and we're going to talk about each of those individually in this PowerPoint. We know that the brain is connected to the spinal cord. We know that from bones, where it goes out the foramen magnum at the bottom. The spinal cord does. Okay, highlight this last part. The meninges is 3 layers around the brain and spinal cord. So it's a membrane that protects the brain and spinal cord. It's in between the bone and the spinal cord, or the bone and the brain. So the meninges is the 3 layers. And so here's the 3 layers. You have the dura layer, which is closest to the bone. So the outside layer. You want to know these in the order of these. Dura layer, arachnoid, and pia. So that's the 3 layers. So you have 3 layers all around the brain, and those 3 layers together we call the meninges. Dura is outer, arachnoid's in the middle, pia is on the inside. And it tells a little bit about each of them, but the arachnoid layer has this cerebral spinal fluid, so this liquid, and that liquid is there to help move the nutrients and the oxygen into the brain or spinal cord, because we got to get food in there, but we don't want to get any bacteria or viruses into the meninges. We don't want the meninges to be infected. So I always think, you've got good bacteria all inside your gut, all inside your mouth, good bacteria, but in the meninges you don't have any bacteria. So there is no normal flora in the meninges. And if there is an infection in the meninges, then we call that meningitis. So you see that over here. Meningitis is infection of the meninges, and it can be caused by a virus or a bacteria or a fungus. And if you take micro, which I hope you get the chance to because it's awesome, when you take micro, you'll get to learn about the different bacteria and viruses and fungi that cause meningitis. But for today, just know that if the meninges are infected, we call that meningitis. Okay, so you can see the picture here, and it shows all 3 layers. Let's see if I can highlight. The dura, not a very good highlighter, huh? Dura, arachnoid, and pia. And so write this in somewhere. A subdural hematoma. Look at the word. Below the dura layer. So subdural hematoma would be bleeding between, I don't know if I can write all of that. Bleeding between dura and arachnoid layer. So if you just look at the word, that's pretty easy. Below the dura, and you know them in order already. You know that their order is dura on the outside. Below the dura is the arachnoid, and then the pia. So hopefully you can get that right if it's a question on the test. Traumatic brain injuries, and I always try to include these clinical applications so we can learn about, clinical applications. But traumatic brain injury would just be, a force. It says a mechanical force, such as a fall or a hit to the brain. And we know about concussions. Interesting, years ago, 15 years ago, we didn't think much about concussions. There weren't, you got a concussion, you stayed out for a day or two playing football, and then you could play again. Well, studies have shown now that if someone, the first concussion happens, then after that, there's going to be more concussions. So you're more likely to have a concussion after the first one. Well, and that could be from getting kicked if you play soccer into the brain or, whatever. And now, present day, now that we have studied more about concussions, we actually think that concussions today lead to long-term brain injuries, memory loss and things like that as we get older. And so, and there's actually a movie about it. Will Smith is in it. I haven't seen the movie, so I'm not, suggesting that or anything, but you might want to see it. But we know that concussions cause long-term problems. But what about that fluid, that clear fluid, and it's supposed to be clear because there's no infections there. The cerebral spinal fluid is lots of sodium, low amounts of glucose, and it's got some potassium in there. And it tells you how much we secrete. Cerebral spinal fluid pressure. So you may have heard of like a buildup, someone having to get a drain or a port put in. It's the continuous secretion of that fluid. So more pressure in the ventricles. It remains constant, but you may have heard of that. Okay, so what is our brain made up? And hopefully you know all about this because you've already started preparing for the lab exam. But there's the cerebrum. That's the big gray part right there. So all that gray is the cerebrum. The diencephalon, that would be this part right here. So you got the thalamus and the hypothalamus and the pineal gland. That's the diencephalon. It kind of looks like a bird, doesn't it? Okay, the cerebellum, that's this part right there in the back. And then the brainstem, the whole brainstem is this part right here. And the brainstem consists of the top part, which would be the midbrain. There's a bulge right here you can't see because I drew on it. The pons, and then the medulla oblongata. So, maybe a little higher than that. That's what the brainstem consists of. So we're about to talk about each of those on the slide. But highlight this. The brainstem begins as a neural tube. And so early on in development, that's the next slide actually. Early on in development, in fact, the textbook tells us at 4 weeks embryo development, there's already parts of the brain we can identify. So 4-week embryonic development, there's 3 brain vesicles. So highlight this with me. The forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And as early as 4 weeks embryo, so it's really early, you can identify forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. And that's the part mainly that I want you to know. But this next part, just 1 week later, it's already developed more. So the forebrain is larger. There we go. Let's see. Yeah. The forebrain is larger, so it's got 2. The hindbrain is larger, and then the midbrain remains the same. But just in 1 week, you can see that the central nervous system is developing. And when you take 202, you'll see when we learn about the development, it's the last chapter in 202 is baby development. You'll see the nervous system develops the whole time. So it starts early as 4 weeks, and it develops until your mid-20s, right? So but embryonic development, it develops the whole 9 months. And I think we would all agree that it continues to develop. So don't make any rash decisions until you're 30. Anyway, just kidding about that part. But it starts early and it continues to develop. And then the adult, okay, so thinking back forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. The forebrain develops and it becomes the cerebrum and the diencephalon. The midbrain is still the same. The hindbrain is the cerebellum, the pons, that's, on the brainstem, and the medulla oblongata. So all three are really important. So all this is saying is that it continues to develop into what we know of as the adult brain. Okay, so let's look at some details about the adult brain. It's got two hemispheres, a right and a left, two halves. Where it's connected is called the corpus callosum, and let me show you a picture of that right here. So the corpus callosum is right there where it turns. Let me do that with another color. So now, well, that's great. Anyway, you can see it though. The corpus callosum is all right there. There you go. Maybe you can see it now. It's red. So the corpus callosum is what connects the two hemispheres together. So it's right in there. It kind of looks like a C to me, but facing downward. So maybe you can remember that. Okay, back to this slide. So corpus callosum is connecting. Gyri, that's the ridges up. Gyri, that's the ridges, the bumps that go up. Sulcus, that's the in-between. And then there's two fissures. One long one, and you can see it here in this picture. That's the longitudinal fissure. It goes all the way down the two hemispheres that are connected with the corpus callosum. And then there's a transverse fissure, and it is here, right? Separates the cerebellum from the cerebrum. Okay, write this in about those gyri. Lyssencephaly. So in the cerebrum, there are no bumps. Seizures caused by no of the gyri, none of them. And so it would be commonly thought of as a smooth brain. And just when you're studying, if you ever see gyrus, G-Y-R-U-S, that's singular. U-S is singular. Gyri is plural. So just when you're studying, that might help you a little bit. Okay, so that's structures of the brain. Different lobes, and I think you know this from the bones. Frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital. The insula, we haven't talked about that before. It's right underneath, I guess, the frontal lobe, so you can kind of see it there. And we're going to talk more about it. Okay, the cerebral cortex. Pretty important, amazing structure, we'll say. So make sure you know about the cerebral cortex. It is a thin layer of gray matter which makes up the outermost layer. But what it is it's a covering. It's a brain covering. And so the notes don't actually make that clear, but write it in. It covers the brain. Thin layer of gray matter which makes up the outside of the cerebrum. And let me, just for definition's sake, so you'll know the difference. Gray matter, think back to chapter 10 or the nervous system part 1. Think back to myelin versus myelinated. Myelin, we talked about, was that rubber coating on each axon. Well, if it's gray matter, then it's unmyelinated. So I'm going to write that in, just so you'll know when you're studying, when you see gray matter, what is that? That's neurons that don't have myelin on them. Okay, if it's white matter of the cerebrum makes up most of it is white matter. It's myelinated, or we can write in there white matter. So that'll help you just study and know the difference in those two. But I always think, and if you flash back to 10, the axon has that myelin around it, and I think about it like a rubber coating. So, rubber coating on my earbuds or on an extension cord. What does the rubber coating do? It lets the electricity go straight down that wire and nowhere else. Otherwise, it'd burn your house down, right? if it wasn't wrapped in the wire, or shock you. The electricity would get out if it weren't for the rubber wire. And so it's kind of like that. It allows the impulse, the nerve impulse, it allows that action potential to travel straight down that neuron in white matter. The myelinated, it goes straight through. It doesn't burn the muscles as it goes down. So the peripheral nervous system is made up of myelinated axons. However, gray matter on the cerebral cortex, it doesn't have that coating on it. And so what happens when the nerve impulse, the action potential is in the cerebral cortex, it spreads out fast. Think of it more like electricity on water. It can go faster, it can spread out, it doesn't have to go straight through. However, if there were muscles around, it could burn them, but there's not. There's that cerebral spinal meninges layer, so it's okay there. And then and you'll remember in your lab the gray matter versus white matter in the spinal cord. So make sure you see that, because you might see it on the lab test. Okay, what does that magic layer do, the cerebral cortex? Well, higher mental function. So, remembering, being able to, okay, so hopefully on your test, you're going to remember your notes. You're going to be able to figure out your notes and apply it to the test, reason it, retrieve the information. But it also stores intelligence and personality. So, pretty important thin covering. Okay, and this is what the cortex does. So this is all the cortex, but it's regions that the function. So it says the cerebral cortex can be divided into sensory, association, and motor. That's what we're about to look at the next 3 slides. And I won't ask you to memorize this picture by any means, but just look at it, and you can see, one thing I find interesting is that vision is in the back. And so visual area is in the occipital lobe, where auditory is right here. Some I'm going to point out in the next couple slides. The brochus, that's speech, and that's actually on, you may see that on your test, so put a star there. Brochus is speech. Let's see, this one says over here on the right, sensory areas involved with cutaneous, that's skin, we know that. So all the feeling in the skin is felt right there in that temporal lobe. So it's just neat to know what is sensed at what part of the brain. Okay, so 3 motor areas. Nope, associations first. So a couple of association areas you want to kind of look at. Frontal is concentrating, planning, problem solving, and emotional behavior, judging consequences of behavior. Parietal is speech. Temporal, that part stores memories of visual scenes. That is so cool to me, how we can see pictures, and that's in the temporal lobe. Occipital is vision, and that's always odd to me because the eyes are in the front, and you can see in the back of the brain. And then the insula, that was that part up under the parietal lobe. Translating sensory information into proper emotional response. So somebody said something, how are we going to respond? Are you going to be mad or happy? Or some of ours is broken, isn't it? Okay, some motor areas you want to look at. Just pointed out 3 of them. Primary motor area, that's going to be frontal lobe. That's moving, right? Moving your bicep, moving your quads, moving your facial expressions or whatever. So that's in the front. Brochus area, that's, make sure you highlight it. I know you have already, but that's speech. And then frontal eye field, that's just above the brochus area, and that's eye movement. So it takes a lot of nerves to move the eye, and we're going to look at that and vision a little bit later. Okay, skin. Feeling in the skin, cutaneous. Visual, that's going to be seeing. That's in the occipital lobe. And then auditory, that's in the temporal lobe, and that kind of fits because that'd be right about where the ears are close to anyway. Okay, and this just shows you in a table, so I enlarged this table for you. so you can kind of see each lobe and the function of each. So read through that. Okay, the diencephalon. You know this from lab. It's got the thalamus, and I think the thalamus looks like a bird eye. And then the hypothalamus is like a bird beak. Also, the pineal gland. It's a little gland in the very back that we're not going to talk at all about in 201. In 202, we'll talk about how it controls sleep patterns, but you don't care today. So the diencephalon has the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the pineal gland in it. Okay, that's what you for sure want to focus on for this class, is the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The egg, the bird eye. The bird eye and the bird beak. For lab, you want to be able to find those and identify them. Gateway for sensory impulse, ascending to the cerebral cortex, receives all sensory impulse. So when you see, it goes to the thalamus, and then the thalamus sends it to the appropriate place. The hypothalamus, all of that right there, the one you really want to know is nervous system to endocrine system. Okay, let me tell you what that first bullet means. In your brain you have, so here's your, I'm going to draw this out. Here's your thalamus, and here's your hypothalamus. Doesn't that look just like a bird? Okay, and then below that is a big pituitary gland. Okay, and it's got two humps to it, kind of. Okay, not a very good drawing, but it'll work. So the pituitary gland, which is the two humps, Humpty, it's a gland. It releases, you don't care for today, it releases lots of hormones, and you don't have to know any specifics in this class. In 202, that's the first thing you're going to learn, and you're going to really enjoy it, interesting. But for today, just know it's a big, important gland. Not big in size, big in importance. And so it releases several hormones that control lots of body functions. And that's what that first bullet says. All those functions. And so the hypothalamus, the bird beak, the hypothalamus controls the pituitary gland. So that's what that second bullet says. It links the brain nervous system to the pituitary gland endocrine system. So that's why that first bullet is there. So I'm not going to ask you to memorize all of that first bullet because you're going to learn it in 202. That's next time. Okay, here's your brainstem. And we know that the brainstem is made up of the midbrain, this rounded bulge called the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So 3 parts to the brainstem. Make sure you can identify those for lab too. Okay, what does the midbrain do? Those first couple bullets just tell you where it is. Contains bundle fibers that join lower parts of the brainstem to the spinal cord. But that table at the end, it's on slide 28, says, contains reflex centers that move the eye and head, maintains your posture. So it helps you move your eyes, helps you do posture. So it helps you move your eyes, helps you posture. So maybe write that in. The pons, that's that when you look from that side vision, that's that rounded bulge between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. What does it do? Rhythm of breathing. At night, when you go to bed, you breathe a little slower because it's night time. In the mornings, you're exercising, maybe. You're breathing harder, getting your CO2 out of the body, oxygen in the body. So it controls the breathing rhythm. Okay, medulla oblongata. I always think about Waterboy. Has nothing to do with alligators and teeth or whatever. Not recommending that movie, just referencing it, I guess. The medulla oblongata is the bottom. It's right before the spinal cord, the bottom of the brainstem. And it says on the notes, respiratory control, cardiac, and vasomotor. Okay, let me simplify that and make it a little easier. Write this in. It is heart rate, respiration, and blood pressure. Pretty important. Okay, the reticular formation, what that is, if you look right here, there's a little branch of it, because at first I was like, why is that picture on there? But it's a branch of networks, and it goes all through the brain. So it's not just in the brainstem, all through it. But what it does, it's a nice drawing, isn't it, is wakefulness. Okay, and if it were to be injured, it could put you in, if any of the reticular formation were injured, it would make you unconscious or in a coma. And so write that in up under wakefulness, unconscious state, if it were injured. So unconscious state if injured. So write that in about reticular formation. If that branching, it reminds me of trees when I see branching network of neurons was injured, you would become unconscious. Cerebellum, that's in the back, and it is posture, skeletal movement, right? Coordinate skeletal muscles. And you know from lab, it's got that arbor vitae. Oh, not very good there. That's the white part of, if you look at the lab picture, the cerebellum in the back of the brain, it's got white branching, and you're going to be able to identify that on the lab test as arbor vitae, where the two cerebellums go together. So if you look at this picture right here, where the two cerebellums go together, that would be the vermis. Be able to identify those on the test, lab test. Okay, and this next slide is really just a summary of the brain and the function, the brain, different brain parts and the function. So now we're moving to the spinal cord, right? It comes out of the brain, out through that foramen magnum, and it tapers down. So look at this picture over on the side. It's slender column, extends through the foramen magnum, terminates. Okay, that's what, highlight that. It terminates in a tapering cone-shaped structure. Conus medullaris. It terminates in a cone-shaped structure, and that's what this is right here. So it, see how it ends like that? But it actually ends at that lumbar one. Now after that, it's going to branch out like a fibers, like a horse's tail, nerve fiber, lots and lots and lots of fibers. Anyway, and that is the cauda equina. So you want to know that. Cauda equina is the collection of root fibers at the end. So the end is the conus medullaris, that's the terminates, end. The cauda equina, that's the fibers that are like, cauda means tail, equina is reference to horse. Here you'll see the structures of the spinal cord, and you can see where it gets larger at the cervical area, larger at the lumbar area, and then the two things we just pointed out. Okay, injuries. In this slide, after I got to reading it, I thought, well, that's not very detailed, but it depends on where it's injured and how badly it's injured. But we do already know from the chapter before, the central nervous system doesn't do mitosis generally. It doesn't regenerate. And so an injury to the spinal cord could be very, very, very severe. Okay, now we're at the second part of the PowerPoint, the peripheral nervous system. So that's going to be the nerves that come out of the brain, cranial nerves, and spinal nerves. And the peripheral nervous system is divided into two parts. Somatic, and that's going to be the connection of the central and peripheral, but that's conscious, that you control. And then autonomic would be the subconscious that you don't control. Okay, so here's the cranial nerves. We're gonna look at 12 cranial nerves, and that's what the next part is about. Okay, the olfactory nerve is the first one, and it's smell. The optic vision, that one's pretty easy. Optic vision, so these are the 12. Oculomotor is going to be voluntary muscles that move the eyelid and move the eye. involuntary muscles that also adjust the lens, big and small, when you walk into light or walk out of the light. And then the trochlear nerve is the smallest one, and it also moves the eyes. So those are the first four. Okay, the fifth one is the trigeminal nerve, and I left all of that information on there just really to show you that it's important. Take a second, just look at the information, kind of learn from it, don't memorize it, but the trigeminal nerve comes in here, and it goes to the eye, it goes to under the tongue, the maxillary, and then it goes to the mandible. So it's big, it's really important. If there were, to be a tumor or have to have surgery, remove part of the jaw. Anyway, if the trigeminal nerve is damaged, it could cause several problems with speech, with chewing, with feeling, with facial expressions. But for this test, what I want to make sure that you focus on for this class is that it controls the muscles for chewing. And it also controls the lower teeth, that feeling. You have toothache on the bottom. So, but muscles of mastification, and right in, that means chewing, right? We know that. It controls that masseter. Abducent, ABD, away from. If you're abducted, away from. But it moves the eye outward, 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 outward. Facial nerve, easy breezy, does facial expressions like smiling. Vestibular cochlear nerve, cochlear, ear, cochlear, ears, right? So it's going to be hearing. Glossopharyngeal, think about like spit is glossy, right? Sensory pharynx, tonsil, part of the tongue, but it makes you salivate. Vagus nerve, autonomic motor. So it's from the brain to senses from the heart, the thoracic, the abdominal. Let's write that in a little bit more simple. Black and white. This nerve allows you to receive impulses from the, let's make that. Thoracic and abdominal organs. And so vagus is when your belly hurts, you feel it in your brain, allows you to be able to feel that. Abdominal organs, the esophagus, and we've probably all felt things there. Okay, do me a favor. Go back. I want to go back a couple slides and have you highlight balance and hearing receptors on vestibular cochlear nerve. Okay, and this is a list of all 12 cranial nerves and the function. So take some time and look over this. It's really a summary of the last few slides. What each nerve does. Okay, so now we're moving on. There are 31 spinal nerves, and good news, you don't have to know details about all 31 of these. However, look over it. 31 spinal nerves. There's 8 of them in the thoracic region, so right here. There are 12 of them in the I said that all wrong. Okay. There are 8 of them in the cervical region. I think I said that wrong the first time. 12 in the thoracic region. And 5 in the lumbar region. 1 in the sacral nerve. And 1 in the coccygeal nerve. Okay. And then we already talked about the cauda equina would be those hair-like root fuzzies hanging down, right? Formed by descending root of the lumbar and sacral, that the nerves that come out. A dermatome, that's where the skin is. And this picture is so interesting to me. It shows, take a second look at it, the cervical spinal nerves. That's that dark brown color. Allows you to feel sensations in all of the thoracic here. The lumbar is here. So you can just kind of see that's the sensation, the skin, an area of skin innervated. I'm going to highlight all this by the sensory nerve fibers of a particular spinal nerve. So with the cranial nerves, we looked at each function. Here you just want to look at the location. And then the last topic, last one, the autonomic, that's the automatic, unconscious, the things that you don't control, is divided into two parts: sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, sympathetic is going to be your fight or flight, excited, speed up. So it speeds up everything. Speed up your heartbeat, increase muscle strength. It makes everything a little bit ramped up. Parasympathetic is going to be slowed down, prepares the body for resting, and it actually is digestion too, increasing digestion, but slow everything down, calm down. And this is something that we don't control naturally. Now we can, to an extent, get fired up or calm ourselves down with deep breaths, but that natural, almost had a car wreck, heartbeat fast, that's going to be sympathetic. Parasympathetic would be, calm down, resting, not stressful, just I'm just chilling after work, right? And so the textbook explains that these two things don't work against each other, but they actually work together to make who we are. Do we ramp up, fight or flight? That's what you want to highlight. Or do we calm down? And together they give that perfect balance. And the next two slides are just pictures that show all that they control. And it's the involuntary things, the unconscious things, like the movement of the eye, the heartbeat, the respiration, and then it's actually the sympathetic actually decreases digestion. But don't think about that. When you're all stressed out and worried, you're not digesting your food as well, and that's why stress can make you gain weight. And then the opposite, parasympathetic, calm down, slow down, and it's going to speed up digestion. All right, I hope this was helpful.